The distress beacon was not supposed to exist. I was 41 minutes into what should have been the most boring shift of my career when it hit our receivers. A signal so old, so compressed, so completely wrong for this region of space that our system flagged it 3 times before accepting it as real. I stared at the readout. My coffee went cold. I did not notice. My name is Mara Voss. I work for the UN Deep Space Survey Corps, and I have spent 11 years cataloging rocks. Beautiful, indifferent, ancient rocks floating in the dark beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto, in the wide cold belt of debris that most of the galaxy calls things I will get to later. We call it the Kuiper Belt. There is a visitor center on Pluto Station with a gift shop that sells snow globes with tiny replica dwarf planets inside. I have 3 of them. I gave 2 away to people I no longer speak to. The beacon was coming from Grid Sector 7, Foxtrot, which is not a location where anything interesting has ever happened. I had personally logged 4,200 objects in that sector over the past 3 years. Rocks, ice, a retired Soviet-era probe that drifted farther than anyone planned. No signals, no structures, no reason for my hands to be doing what they were doing right now, which was shaking. I called my team lead, Owen Birch, a patient man from Manchester who wore the same gray thermal undershirt every single day and had strong opinions about the correct way to make tea. He picked up on the second ring. "There is a beacon in 7 Foxtrot," I said. "Silence." "Owen." "I heard you," more silence. "Then, log it and don't touch anything." He was at my station in 4 minutes. He looked at the readout. He made a sound that was not quite a word. Then he called Director Pauline Garrett, who was 3 time zones away in Geneva, and who also made a sound that was not quite a word when she saw the signal strength and origin data. We launched a retrieval drone inside the hour. What it found took another 6 hours to reach us at transmission speed, and I spent those 6 hours doing what I always do when I am trying not to think about something. I cataloged rocks. 4,201, 4,202, 4,203. The numbers are a kind of prayer. They are the only prayer I know that works. The drone's camera feed came through at 03:14 station time. The object in Sector 7, Foxtrot, was not a rock. It was a ship, or what had been a ship. It was massive in the way that makes you recalibrate your sense of scale, the kind of massive where you look at it, look away, look back, and your brain still refuses to file it correctly. Longer than any vessel humanity has ever constructed, built from a dark alloy that our spectrometer read 3 times before outputting a result, and the result was unknown composition. The hull was fractured along its spine, not from collision. The fracture pattern was wrong for impact. It came from inside. Something inside that ship had expanded, fast and catastrophic, and the hull had peeled open like a piece of fruit left in the sun too long. Owen was standing behind me. I could hear him breathing. "It's not ours," I said, which was obvious, but someone needed to say it. "No," he agreed, "it is not ours." The drone circled the hull and I watched the feed and took notes the way my hands have been trained to take notes, automatic, precise, emotionally disconnected, and the notes I took were as follows: vessel length approximately 4.2 kilometers, hull markings in a non-human script, partially burned away, drive signature consistent with no known propulsion system in our registry, outer hull temperature, 2 degrees above ambient space. It had been cold for a very long time, but not as cold as its surroundings. Something had kept it fractionally warmer. I did not note what that meant. I noted the number. I moved on. The drone found the breach point and entered the ship. "I want to tell you about the corridors. I want to tell you they were alien and incomprehensible and nothing like anything I had seen. But the truth is worse than that. The corridors were recognizable. They had the same logic as our own: passageways, junctions, sealed compartments, the universal grammar of a space built for beings who need to get from one place to another without dying. Whatever built this ship had the same basic problems we do. That is either comforting or deeply unsettling, depending on how much coffee you have had. The corridors were empty. Not abandoned empty, where you see the remnants of departure, personal items, scattered equipment, the human-shaped evidence of a life interrupted. Empty, stripped. Whatever crew this ship carried, they had not left in a hurry. They had not left at all. The burn patterns began in the central corridor. They radiated outward, every direction, perfect radial geometry, which is not what you get from an explosion or a fire. You get that from a source, a point of origin. Something had started in the middle of this ship and moved in every direction simultaneously, and the burn patterns on the walls were not damage in the conventional sense. They were impressions, like something had pressed itself into the metal from the inside and left its shape behind. I stopped taking notes. Owen said very quietly, "Mara." "I see it," I said. The drone reached the escape pod bay. 12 pods, 11 were gone. One was still sealed, its release mechanism intact, its departure never triggered. The crew had time to use the pods. 11 of 12 used theirs. One did not. I authorized the drone to breach the sealed pod. Inside, one recording device. A log crystal, format unknown, but our system managed a partial read. 17 seconds of data. Looping. The being recorded on it was not human. I will not try to describe what it looked like because the image was degraded and because some things are better left to the listener's imagination, but its posture needed no translation. The posture was universal. The posture was on its knees. It was not screaming. The beings that scream have not yet understood what is happening to them. This being understood. It had moved past screaming into something older. It was praying. In a cadence our linguistic database flagged as archaic, a form of the language abandoned by its species 800 years prior, according to the council registry Owen pulled while I watched the loop repeat. You go back to the old words when the new ones are not enough. I pocketed the crystal. I logged the rest of the pod's contents as consistent with debris. It was the first time in 11 years I had falsified a log entry, and my hands did not shake when I did it, which told me something about myself that I chose not to examine closely. The drone completed its survey, and I began filing the retrieval report. Pauline Garrett was still on the line. Owen had stopped breathing loudly behind me, which meant he was holding his breath, which he does when he is trying to decide whether to say something. "Say it," I told him. "The registry match came back," he said. I ran the hull markings through the council database. I waited. "Dreth Imperium," he said. "The vessel is registered to the Dreth Imperium." The room went very still, not because of any noise or movement, because of the absence of both. Even the ventilation seemed to pause. The Dreth Imperium had not been seen in 300 years. Their official status in the Galactic Council records was withdrawn. Voluntary withdrawal from active galactic engagement. That was the phrase, voluntary withdrawal. I had read it in briefing documents and accepted it the way you accept things written in official documents, which is to say, without looking at it too hard. I was looking at it now. A civilization that glassed 4 inhabited planets, the Council's own documentation, careful and bloodless, and then simply withdrew, stopped. Disappeared. The galaxy noted the silence and filed it under good news and moved forward. The Dreth did not withdraw. The Dreth came here, to this belt of cold rocks beyond our smallest planet, and they did not leave. The drone was running its final exterior sweep when I caught it. I almost missed it. I was looking at debris distribution data on my secondary screen and my eye snagged on something in the drone's camera feed. A texture on the outer hull that did not match the surrounding burn damage. I pulled the feed back, zoomed, enhanced. It was carved into the outer hull from the outside. Something had pressed letters, Dreth letters. Owen confirmed it into the metal exterior of this ship from the outside, deliberately, precisely. Our translation system took 40 seconds to render it. 4 words. We tried, do not try. I read it twice. I read it a third time. The drone hovered. The ship floated in the dark. Pluto was a distant smudge of pale light on our screens. Somewhere past it, Earth turned without knowing any of this was here. Owen made that sound again. The one that was not quite a word. How many? I said. I was not sure what I meant when I asked it. How many ships? How many species? How many warnings left in the dark by things that came here convinced of their own power and left, those that left it all carrying something new in them, something that made them go back to the old words. Owen did not answer because he did not know. Neither did I. Not yet. I saved the drone footage. All of it, including the parts I had flagged as debris. I backed it up in 3 locations. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the sector map, 7, Foxtrot, the most boring grid in the most boring belt in what was supposed to be the most thoroughly cataloged region of our solar system. And I thought about how many years I had spent counting rocks in this darkness, without once asking what the darkness was counting back. My coffee was cold. I drank it anyway. It tasted like a decision I had already made. I began drafting the full report. It was going to be a very long night. The council chamber on Ganymede Station is designed to be impressive. High ceilings, curved walls inlaid with the sigil scripts of 37 member species, lighting calibrated to be simultaneously tolerable for beings whose visual range covers spectrums I cannot see. The chairs at the central table are adjustable in 17 dimensions because not everyone who sits in them uses the same number of limbs or the same definition of sitting. I had been in this room 4 times in my career. Each time, it felt like standing inside a sentence writ in a language I was still learning. I was not supposed to be here with the footage. I was supposed to be here for what Pauline Garrett had described, in the brief she sent me at 5 a.m. 2 days prior, as a preliminary consultation on deep field debris survey methodology. As though I was here to discuss how I count rocks, as though the Dreth ship sitting in Sector 7, Foxtrot, was a footnote rather than the headline. I walked into the chamber with my tablet, my cold travel thermos, and the log crystal in my jacket pocket. I was wearing the good blazer, the navy one I keep for occasions when I need people to take me seriously before I open my mouth. Detroit taught me that. You dress for the credibility you intend to claim. There were 11 delegations in the room. I stopped just inside the door and counted them. Twice. I had been told 3 delegations, routine consultation, preliminary. 11 was not preliminary. 11 was the kind of number that means someone already knows what is coming and has been making calls. Owen behind me put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Not comfort, warning. His version of both are the same gesture. I found my seat at the central table. Pauline was already there, her expression the specific neutrality of someone who has been awake for 30 hours and has replaced all normal emotion with professionalism. She did not look at me when I sat down. She looked at the wall. I took that as information. The Velthori delegation was directly across the table. 3 of them, the ambassador, whose name translates to something approximating third voice of the patient shore, and 2 aides who had not moved or spoken since I entered. The Velthori have 4 faces, not 4 sides to one face. 4 distinct faces arranged around their head, each capable of independent expression. Watching them look at something is watching a committee reach a consensus in real time. All 4 of the ambassador's faces were looking at the table. His secondary eyelids, the inner membrane, the one they lower involuntarily under extreme stress, were sealed. All 4 sets. He was looking at nothing because looking at something required an openness he could not currently manage. I had never seen a Velthori with their secondary eyelids closed. I had not known they could close them voluntarily. I was not sure this was voluntary. I opened my tablet. I did not look at the ambassador again. Some things you file away and examine later when you have enough quiet around you to do it properly. The session opened with procedural statements that I will not reproduce here because they were the verbal equivalent of a waiting room and no one should have to sit through them twice. I delivered my survey summary, factual, compressed, everything in the correct order, and when I reached the part about the hull inscription, the room changed temperature. Not literally, but the quality of the silence shifted in a way I can only describe as becoming heavier. Then the delegations began. Not one by one, not formally. More like a dam giving way, each delegation adding its record to mine, until the table was covered in holographic projections of debris fields and wreck sites and trajectory data spanning 4,000 years of galactic history, all of it pointing at the same patch of dark beyond our smallest planet. The HFY had come in 2200 BCE by Earth's calendar, fleet of 90 vessels. Objective: annexation of the inner solar system, starting with the outer belt as a staging ground. 61 vessels returned. The surviving commanders submitted a collective report that the HFY government sealed for 800 years before finally declassifying it. The declassified version, the delegate explained, contained 17 pages of tactical analysis and one sentence of conclusion. We do not recommend a second attempt. The Velthori sent 3 separate expeditions across 600 years. The second expedition came closest, penetrated deep into the belt before the losses began. Exactly 12% of that fleet returned. Not approximately, exactly. The same percentage as every other fleet from every other species. 12%, precise, deliberate, enough to carry the story home, not enough to try again with confidence. 12% is not a kill rate, it is a message delivery system. The Dreth, the delegate from the Galactic Archives explained, had been the most recent and the most committed. They had spent 40 years preparing their incursion. They had studied all prior failures and concluded that the prior expeditions had simply been insufficiently large. The Dreth solution to most problems was scale. More ships, more force, more certainty. They launched a fleet that the archives recorded as the largest single military mobilization in the past millennium. 12% came back. The Dreth, as a civilization, never recovered from the mathematics of that return. Their empire did not collapse at once, but something in their collective understanding of themselves, the thing that had let them glass 4 planets and call it a border dispute, that thing did not survive the journey home. They withdrew not because they were defeated in any conventional sense. They withdrew because whatever came back from the belt was not the same thing that went in, and whatever was left at home did not know how to be a civilization built around certainty anymore. I sat with my cold thermos and I listened to 4,000 years of the galaxy learning the same lesson in 11 different ways, and I thought about the log crystal in my pocket and the being on its knees going back to the old words, and I thought about the message carved into the outside of the hull, and I thought, you all came with maps. Every single one of you came with a map and a plan and a certainty about what was out there and how to take it. And whatever is out there looked at your maps and your plans and your certainty and sent you home at 12%, not as an act of rage, not as a declaration of war, but as a consistent, patient, utterly unhurried policy. The Galactic Council's formal request, when it finally came after 3 hours of records and testimony, and the careful diplomatic language that wraps a simple thing in 40 layers of courtesy, was this: sign the exclusion treaty. Recognize the outer belt of the Sol system as a protected galactic zone. Cease all deep field survey operations. Leave it alone. They looked at me, the way adults look at a child running toward a road. I looked at them the way you look at people who have been afraid of your basement for 4,000 years and never once thought to knock on the door and ask what was down there. The Velthori ambassador's secondary eyelids were still sealed. He had not opened them once during the entire session. I had been watching. Pauline spoke before I could. She was diplomatic and careful and said all the right things about humanity's commitment to galactic partnership and the value of the Council's historical data and the importance of proceeding with appropriate caution. She was very good at her job. She looked at me twice during that speech, and both times her expression said, "Do not do what you are thinking about doing." I reached into my jacket pocket. I set the log crystal on the table. 11 delegations looked at it. The Velthori ambassador's secondary eyelids opened. All 4 sets at once, the involuntary, unguarded opening of something that has been bracing for impact. "This was in the sealed pod," I said. "It is 17 seconds of data it loops." I paused. The commander is not screaming. No one spoke. "I want to table the treaty discussion," I said. "Not reject it, table it. I want 2 weeks." Pauline's expression did not change. Beneath the table, I was fairly certain, her hand found her own knee and pressed down. "2 weeks for what?" the HRAF delegate asked. It was the first time their delegation had spoken in open session in recorded history, which meant the question was not really a question about timelines. "To ask," I said. The room was very quiet. The Velthori ambassador looked at me across the table, all 4 faces, all 4 sets of eyes, open and unshielded, and he spoke in English, which he had never done in any recorded session, in any language registry, in any capacity at any point in his 40 years as a council representative. "You do not understand," he said. "We are not warning you away from a danger." He paused. The pause was long enough to be its own kind of sentence. "We are warning you before you become one." I picked up the log crystal, held it for a moment, set it back down. I did not answer him. I did not answer him because I had heard something in what he said in the specific shape of his concern. That was not fear of the thing in the belt. It was fear of us, not what we were, what we might become after. And I thought, what if that is not a reason to stop? What if that is a reason to be very, very careful? I asked for my 2 weeks. The session closed without a vote on the treaty. Pauline walked out beside me without speaking for 4 full minutes, which is, for Pauline Garrett, the loudest thing she knows how to say. I filed the request for a solo survey pod on a Tuesday. The response came back Thursday, not an approval, not a denial, but a procedural hold pending interagency review, which in government language means yes if you are patient and no if you are smart. I am from Detroit. I submitted the same request with different paperwork on Friday. It was approved Saturday morning by an automated system that did not know it was supposed to be the 7th line of bureaucratic defense against exactly this kind of thing. The pod was named Henrietta. I did not name her. She came named. Her prior operator, a survey tech who had transferred out to a station posting near Europa, had stenciled the name on the interior bulkhead next to the pilot's seat in red paint that was starting to chip at the edges. I thought about painting over it. I left it. My mother's name was also Henrietta. She died when I was 22. She would have found this funny and terrifying in equal measure, which was how she found most things I did. Owen knew I was going. He showed up at the dock the morning of my departure with a thermos of actual good coffee and a look on his face that had several layers to it, the top layer being calm, the bottom layer being something I recognized from the way people looked at me as a kid when I was about to do something they had already decided they could not stop. "You are not logging this departure," he said. "The automated system logged it. The automated system thinks you are doing a 3-day ice survey in Grid 9 Charlie. Then the automated system is satisfied." He handed me the thermos. "Come back," he said. Not be careful, not good luck, just come back. Owen Birch is a man of minimum words and maximum meaning. I took the thermos and I went. The transit to the belt takes 4 days at survey pod speed. 4 days of silence and instrument readings and the gradual dimming of the sun in my forward viewport. It does not go dark, not out here, but it becomes something other than the sun you grew up under. It becomes a very bright star among other stars. You lose the sense that it is yours. I ran my systems checks. I reviewed my survey notes from 7 Foxtrot. I replayed the drone footage from the Dreth ship 17 times, not because I was looking for anything new, but because repetition is how my brain processes things it does not yet have words for. I played the 17-second loop from the log crystal over the Henrietta's speakers and listened to it until the sound of it stopped being frightening and became simply present. A thing that existed, a piece of evidence to be examined without flinching. By day 3, I had stopped listening to it, not because I was done with it, but because I had extracted everything from it I was going to extract by listening alone. The rest required being there. I crossed into Sector 7, Foxtrot, on the morning of day 4. The debris field looked exactly as it always looked: rocks, ice, the skeletal drift of ancient material that the solar system never quite organized into a planet. I had cataloged this material for years. I knew its texture and its density and its spectral signature the way you know the streets of a neighborhood you grew up in. But I had been cataloging the material, not the space between the material. I ran a new scan, not for objects, for pattern. The difference sounds small. It was not small. The debris field, viewed as a collection of individual objects, was chaotic, random accumulation over billions of years. Viewed as a pattern, it had a shape. The shape had a center. The center was not where anything particularly notable appeared on any of our prior survey maps. I pointed Henrietta at the center, and I flew toward it. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. The ambient reading in this section of the belt was half a degree above what the stellar distance should produce. Not enough to flag on a standard sweep, enough to flag when you are looking for it. The second thing I noticed was the quiet. Space is not quiet in any real sense. Radiation is constant, particle collision produces signal. The instruments are always reading something. But there is a quality to deep space that deep space workers develop a feel for, the way sailors develop a feel for weather. The quality in this section of the belt was different from anything I had charted before. Not silence, something more like attention. I kept flying. The garden appeared on my sensors 20 minutes before I could see it visually. Not as a garden. I am using that word now because it is the closest word I have. But the sensor reading was a dense concentration of organized matter at a scale that should not be possible in open space, with a molecular structure that my spectrometer tried to categorize and gave up and simply reported as does not match known classifications. When the viewport gave me a visual, I stopped the pod. I sat for a long time. The structures, if they were structures, if structure was the right word for something that breathed in the way that rock and metal and engineered material do not breathe, extended across a region of space that I would later calculate as roughly 400 kilometers in diameter. They were blue-black, the specific shade of something that absorbs light rather than reflects it. They had the geometry of things built with intention, angles and arcs and relationships between forms that repeated at different scales, the mathematical signature of design. But they also had the quality of things grown, organic irregularity at the edges, surfaces that changed slightly as I watched, a responsiveness to the ambient temperature fluctuation that suggested active process rather than static structure. They were both. They were also neither. My brain kept trying to choose a category and kept failing. At the center of the garden, something waited. I knew it was waiting before I had any rational basis for that conclusion. The knowing came before the evidence. The evidence, when I looked for it, confirmed what I already felt. The central structure was oriented toward me. It had been oriented toward me since I entered the sector. It had been tracking my approach. It was not moving. It was not signaling. It was doing the specific, loaded thing that a person does when they are waiting for someone they have been expecting for a long time. I sat in Henrietta with Owen's good coffee and I looked at it, and it looked at me, And I thought about every species that had flown into this region with weapons and plans and certainty, and come away at 12%. I thought about the message carved into the outside of the Dreth hull. I thought about the ambassador's 4 faces and his sealed secondary eyelids and the specific fear in his English. Not fear of the thing in the belt, but fear of what contact with it might make us. I thought about my mother, who was the most curious person I have ever known, and who walked into every difficult room in her life the same way, first with both hands visible, open, nothing hidden. Not as submission, as statement. I raised my right hand. I waved at the thing at the center of the garden. The wave of a person in a small pod at the edge of a 400-kilometer structure in the dark beyond Pluto. A gesture so small it should have been invisible. The central structure tilted. Then it replicated my wave, exactly. Not the mirror image, not the wave as seen from the outside. The wave as executed. The hand I do not favor, raised, moved in the specific arc I had used. It had been watching long enough to know which hand I favored. I set down my coffee. I picked up my mapping tablet. And then I did what I have always done when I am in the presence of something I do not yet understand. I started taking notes. Communication established itself the way all real communication does, not at once, not with ceremony, but incrementally, through the accumulation of small understandings into larger ones. The first hour was the hardest. The structure had no sound, and I had no transmitter format that matched any of its output, and we spent 60 minutes essentially showing each other our alphabets. Patterns I generated on my sensor array, patterns it returned modified. Modifications I made to those modifications. The grammar of mutual curiosity, built from scratch. By the second hour we had a shared system. It was not language. It was something older than language, the logic of, I do this, then you, then I, then you, and we track what changes. By the third hour, it sent me something complex enough to be a sentence. My translation system took 4 minutes to render it. I watched the buffer churn. I drank cold coffee. The output read, oldest agreement. 2 words. 2 words that landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. I sat with them. I ran the phrase against the Galactic Council's full historical database in a side window, not the summary database, the deep archive that requires a research clearance I technically still hold from a prior grant project. The phrase appeared in the archive in 14 separate entries. The oldest was 80,000 years old, from a pre-linguistic humanity that left no other written record. The most recent was from the Dreth commander's sealed mission files, the ones the Council had classified at the Dreth government's request 3 centuries ago. The Dreth knew about the agreement. They came anyway. I did not know what that said about the Dreth. I did not know what it said about the agreement. I transmitted back, what agreement? The response came faster this time. The translation system managed it in 90 seconds. First ones asked, others took, difference noted. I stared at that for a long time. First ones asked. I looked at the archive entry from 80,000 years ago. Pre-linguistic humanity. No words, no ships, no plans, some version of us so early that we share more with them biologically than culturally had come out here. Not with a fleet. Probably on foot in a manner of speaking, following the dark, following the cold, following the specific human compulsion to walk toward the edge of the known world and look over it. And they had asked. Whatever asking meant without language, the posture, the openness, both hands visible. The structure, the thing I was beginning to think of as a presence rather than an object, had noted the difference between that first contact and every subsequent arrival. 4,000 years of arrivals with maps and weapons and certainty. One original contact with empty hands and a question. The difference noted, held, remembered. I transmitted, what are you? The wait was longer this time. 11 minutes. I timed it. When the response came through, the translation system flagged it as uncertain. The concept did not map cleanly onto any human language structure and had been rendered in the closest available approximation. The word it rendered was caretaker. Then a second transmission, following immediately. You are also caretaker, you forgot. My hand stopped moving over my tablet. I sat very still in Henrietta's pilot seat, with the name chipping off the bulkhead beside me and the garden glowing blue-black in my viewport, and I thought about what it means to be told you have forgotten something. Not lost it, forgotten it. Forgetting implies it was once known. Then a third transmission. The quietest thing a transmission can be, when it is rendered in text on a screen, is the specific combination of words that hits you somewhere below language. We kept your things. Behind me, the pod's rear storage compartment unlocked. The mechanism made a sound I had never heard from it before, a clean, precise sound, like something disengaging from a long-held position. I had sealed that compartment myself before departure. I had checked it. I had no cargo. I did not go look immediately. I stayed in my seat. I looked at the garden. I looked at the transmission on my screen. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth 4 times, which is what I do when I am in the middle of something too large for me to process in real time, and I need to stay functional anyway. Then I went to look. The compartment was not empty. There was a collection inside it, organized, not stacked randomly, but arranged with the specific care of things that have been stored for a long time by something that understands their value without necessarily understanding their use. Seed casings, vacuum preserved, from plant species that do not exist in any current botanical record. Several samples of soil packed in sealed containers, the composition unlike anything our modern geology catalogs. And in the center, cradled in a packing material that was not anything I could identify by texture or composition, wrapped in something that held its temperature at precisely 4 degrees Celsius, a small object. A bone flute. 7 centimeters long, carved from the fibula of an animal no longer extant, 5 holes, worn smooth on the mouthpiece end from long use, perfectly intact. I picked it up, held it. The carbon dating would come later. I ran the preliminary analysis on my portable kit, not trusting myself to wait, and the preliminary analysis returned an estimate of 80,000 years, plus or minus 6,000. It belonged to the first ones, the ones who came out here with empty hands and a question before we had words for what we were asking. They left something behind, the way you leave something behind when you visit a place you intend to return to. Not forgotten. Left. For safekeeping. We kept your things. I held the flute in both hands and I looked at the garden, and I thought about 4,000 years of species arriving at 12% and carrying the lesson home. And I thought about what the Velthori ambassador said, not warning you away from a danger, warning you before you become one. And I understood it differently now. Not as a fear of violence. As a fear of what happens when a species learns that it is very old, that it has been expected, that something in the dark beyond its smallest planet has been holding its belongings for 80,000 years. Some species might become something dangerous from that knowledge, entitled, convinced of their own cosmic significance, galactic landlords with documentation. I stood in the storage compartment of a pod named Henrietta, holding a bone flute carved before my species had language, and I thought, I just want to know what the song sounded like. I went back to my seat. I sent one more transmission. Why 12%? The response was immediate this time. The translation system did not struggle. Enough to carry the question home, not enough to mistake the question for an answer. I read that twice. Then I started drafting my report. Not the cover version, not the methodology consultation. The real one, all of it, everything. The full report of what is out here in the dark beyond Pluto, what it has been doing for 80,000 years, what it kept, and what it means that it kept it. I titled it with the minimum words that contained everything. Oldest agreement, terms unchanged. Then I flew home. The press conference was not my idea. The press conference was Pauline Garrett's idea, executed with the precision of someone who understood that the alternative was 11 species of rumor doing the work in our place. She stood at the podium on Ganymede Station with the composure of a woman who has been preparing for this specific moment for the past 3 weeks, and she introduced me, and I walked up to the podium with my tablet and my notes and the bone flute in my jacket pocket, and the full report queued on the station's main display system, and I looked at the room. The room was full. Every press credential, every diplomatic observer, every agency representative who had been quietly informed over the previous 72 hours that this briefing was the kind you do not miss. 37 species represented in the room or on relay. Owen Birch was in the third row, in his gray thermal undershirt, holding a cup of tea that I was certain he had argued with someone about the preparation of. The Velthori ambassador was in the front row. All 4 of his faces were open. I did not use prepared remarks. Prepared remarks are for news that has a shape you already understand. This news had a shape that I was still learning as I spoke it. I talked for 90 minutes. I showed the footage, the scans, the transmission records, the translated exchanges. I showed the seed casings and the soil samples on the display. I showed the bone flute, held it up, described its age and its composition and the impossible precision of its preservation. The room was very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone present is hearing something their existing framework cannot yet hold. When I reached the 12% finding, the deliberate arithmetic of it, the consistency across 4,000 years of arrivals, a HRAF delegate stood up without being recognized and spoke. It was the second time in recorded history that a HRAF representative had spoken in open session, and the 2 events had occurred within weeks of each other, which I thought said something about what was happening to the galaxy's relationship with silence. The delegate said, "We calculated it as random variance. Our analysts spent 200 years modeling the casualty distribution as stochastic loss. We chose the explanation that preserved our ability to consider a future attempt." I said, "I know. The Dreth did the same thing. So did 6 other expeditions, according to the archive records. The explanation that lets you keep your certainty is always more attractive than the one that dismantles it." The delegate sat down. I showed the final transmission, the one I had read twice in the pilot seat of Henrietta with a bone flute in my hands, enough to carry the question home, not enough to mistake the question for an answer. The silence after that lasted long enough for me to drink a full cup of coffee, which Pauline had placed on the podium without comment sometime during the previous hour, and which was, miraculously, still hot. The treaty discussion came at the end. Not the exclusion treaty, that was already dead, which everyone in the room knew and most of them had already begun adjusting to. A different treaty. The Velthori ambassador drafted the language himself in English and transmitted it to the podium display while I was still speaking. I read it when I finished. The Sol System outer belt would be designated a protected sovereignty zone. Joint stewardship, human and caretaker. The caretaker was a recognized party to the agreement. The agreement had been in effect for 80,000 years and was now formally acknowledged by the Galactic Council rather than simply enforced by geometry and arithmetic. The vote was unanimous, 37 species. The HRAF, who had spoken twice in open session in 3 weeks, voted first. After, in the corridor, the Velthori ambassador fell into step beside me. I waited. The Velthori do not speak on the timeline of the conversation. They speak on the timeline of readiness. We had walked nearly the full length of the corridor before he said, "I owe you a correction." I looked at him. "When I said we were warning you before you became a danger," he said, "I was wrong about which danger I feared." I waited. I feared you would become what the others became, larger, more certain, more convinced of your own authority after contact. That knowledge of the agreement would become entitlement. He paused. His secondary eyelids moved, not closing, something more subtle, a flicker. I did not account for the possibility that you would simply ask to understand. You did account for it, I said. You just didn't believe it. He made a sound that his species uses for acknowledgement that also carries the specific weight of embarrassment. It is a very particular sound. I had only read about it in xenolinguistics texts. We reached the end of the corridor. He stopped. I stopped. What will you do now? He asked. I thought about the garden, the blue-black structures, the specific quality of being expected by something that has been patient for 80 millennia. I thought about the flute on my shelf at home, next to the photograph of my mother, in the apartment in Detroit that I had been paying rent on for 11 years and staying in for approximately 4 months per year. Talk to it more, I said. Learn what else it kept. Try to figure out what the song sounded like. I paused. And probably file a lot of paperwork. He made the sound again, slightly different this time. The lexical difference indicated something adjacent to appreciation. I went back to my office. I had 1,400 messages and a stack of official response requests from 6 separate governmental bodies and a voicemail from my landlord about a maintenance issue that had been pending since March. I made a list. I started at the top. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in November, I was in my car on the way to the office, stuck behind a cement truck on a road under construction, drinking coffee from a thermos that was not as good as the one Owen had given me, when the emergency alert channel on my radio, which I keep on at low volume out of professional habit, carried a transmission. Open frequency, no encryption, system-wide broadcast. A Velthori ship, designation not given, had entered the outer Sol system at reduced speed and was requesting communication. The transmission they had sent was brief and formal, and in 3 languages simultaneously, because the Velthori are thorough. It said we would like to ask. I turned the radio up. The cement truck moved. The road opened up ahead of me. Morning light hit the windshield at the angle that makes you squint and keep driving anyway. I was smiling before I knew I was doing it. The specific, helpless kind of smile that arrives before you have decided to feel the thing that caused it. I did not reach for my communicator. I did not call Pauline or Owen or the 17 agencies who would be scrambling right now in very important rooms. I just drove, and I thought, yeah, that is the right question. That has always been the right question. The rest of it, the agreements and the maps and the careful arithmetic of who survives and who does not, all of it starts and ends there. Not in force, not in certainty, in the specific, stubborn, irreducible human habit of walking up to a dark and frightening thing and asking what it is. We forgot once, we remembered. Whatever comes next, we will remember this too. The sun was ahead of me, white and sharp in the winter sky, exactly the same sun that looks like just another star from 4 billion miles out. My sun, the one that belongs to a system with a graveyard beyond its smallest planet, a graveyard that no invader had ever won because it was never a graveyard. It was always a garden. And the garden had been waiting, patient and certain, for someone to come home to it. We did.